Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. This week continues my chat with Frank Burton, the host of the Ragbag podcast and the author of the book 100. Now this is part 2 of the chat, so hopefully you've already listened to part 1 that was released last week. If you haven't, go back and check that out. If you haven't and you don't want to go back and check it out, then fair enough, here is part 2. Now in this part, we talk about a wide variety of things, still linking in with Frank's new book, The 100, and we talk about many different things, including different people's perspectives, Frank's commuting, bad customer service, the process of recording and creating an audiobook, what defines conscious, if life actually has meaning or if it's really just complete chaos, Frank's religious ideologies and his views on that sort of thing, the importance of community, and loads of other stuff, including near the end we talk about conspiracy theories, so that's quite fun. So if any of those things sound interesting to you, keep on listening. Now, before we get started, we've got a promo from In the Black podcast, which is one of my all-time favourite independent podcasts. They're quite a small podcast, but it's just incredible. You know, I'll let the trailer speak for itself, but I genuinely listen to these guys every week, so I really implore anyone to go and listen to them. It's fantastic. That's everything from me, really, apart from, check out in the description where a link to Frank's book is there. There's an audiobook version of it. You can buy it on Bandcamp for essentially name your price, so you can do it for free or you can give them a couple of quid, whatever you sort of fancy. But I really, really recommend everyone goes out and checks out the book because I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And if any of you are, like consuming audio, if any of you like audio dramas or anything like that, this is essentially an audiobook, but you don't have to get Audible or any of that sort of tomfoolery. You can just go straight to Bandcamp, download the app, or not. I didn't. I just streamed. So whatever you sort of fancy. Anyway, that's enough from me, guys. And I'll be back at the end of the chat just to talk about, things that are coming out and that sort of thing. So thanks as always for listening, guys. And I'll speak to you all soon.
What's up, family? It's your boy Big O, Mr. In the Black himself, host of the In the Black podcast. Join me and my co-host Phil the Orange Crush.
Hey.
And Rick Hustle Hard.
Hey.
As we discuss the current events, social issues, and hot topics going on in your Black world. Everything from love to politics, entertainment, financial empowerment, and much more. And all from the perspective of 3 Black working professionals and family men. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and pretty much anywhere else you can stream your podcast from. So come join in on our conversation. And as always,
informed, intelligent,
in the Black.
Welcome to Genuine Chit-Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton.
And this is just from me kind of, just contacting people whose music I like and saying, do you want to come on my podcast? We can have a little talk about yourself and stuff like that. And whoever it is who comes on always seems to say a different thing to the previous person, and everyone's had a different experience. Everyone's got a different story to tell. And it's I'm sure you found this yourself doing what you do. It's
I definitely have. And one thing with I was listening to a podcast today actually with Brian Cox. It was a Joe Rogan podcast with Brian Cox, and he was talking about it's a brilliant podcast. I recommend everyone to go check it out. And they were talking about sort of meaning and what humans, we have this sort of more intelligent than most beings on the planet, if not all. And one thing that we attach to things is meaning, which is what, from as far as we can tell, other conscious life don't do that. Maybe they do and we don't understand. But if we just say for argument's sake that no one else does puts meaning on things except humans. When he was talking about that, one thing that kind of sprung to mind of like, what's the meaning of life, that sort of age-old question and things. And the way I visualize it and the way I was thinking about it in your world as well of the 100 is the world is just doing what the world does. The universe is just doing what the universe does. But what is everything is different is perspective, and life is a perception of your own reality. And the way I visualize it is almost, there's that age-old saying, if a tree falls down in the forest, no one's around to hear it, it doesn't make a sound. Well, if you visualize the earth as pitch black darkness, but every human vision, so every field of view that a human can see is like a torchlight, and it's always on, essentially, where they're obviously conscious, and it's almost like that's how the world is illuminated in a sense, not to devalue, the things that go off in the Amazon rainforest and stuff with other animals, but kind of the human experience of just all these little torchlights of just seeing this perspective that's what your life is. That's what makes you special as an individual. It's you see this field of view for however long you're on this earth, and that's that. And I feel like your book really brings that to light of all these things happen in the city. There's the politician who, he gets nicknamed the gardener because he wants to kill all these dandelions that everyone's complaining about, and they end up just killing all plant life except trees, and then he just kills all the trees as well. And it's just like, you hear about that happening at some point, but there's other characters that kind of reference it. And it's interesting that with people's lives, there are events that happen, but everyone takes it differently. And I find it very intriguing that you managed to convey so many different perspectives at once in your book. And I just congratulate you on that. I just think that was fantastic.
Thank you. But I mean, it's true that everything is connected, and if you take a step back from society a little way, you can see the way that one life will influence another life in a way that you wouldn't necessarily have imagined it doing. So if you think about the number of people that you meet in a day, particularly if you live in a city, or if you kind of work in a city or something like that, you come into contact with so many different people. And how many of those lives do you actually influence without meaning to influence? It's just there's it's chaos really, because there's no real sort of plan behind it. I'm living a very different life now, but because I used to work in central London, like I was saying, and that kind of the experience of working in central London kind of really influenced the writing of the novel 100, because a lot of it's about kind of being in kind of a really crowded environment, but also being kind of your own person within that environment. And I've lost the thread of what I was saying, but
it's just all different perspectives and things, and of people living, and it's just very interesting in that way of just seeing it from all these sort of different perspectives. Was generally where you're going.
Yes, indeed, yeah. So it just sort of makes you aware that how many different things are going on at once. And I quite like the idea of I quite like just walking through like a really, really crowded street with lots and lots of people in it, and I don't recognize any of those people, I don't know any of those people, and they're all going off doing like a different thing. And it's sort of interesting to see society at that level, that everybody's kind of like I was saying, I don't want to be one of those people who paints it as a picture of kind of loneliness and isolation. Like, people always complain about people don't talk to each other on the tube and stuff like that. And I call me controversial, but I quite like that. I quite like getting on the tube, like surrounded by people, and nobody talks to you and you don't talk to them. And but it's still kind of it's a communal experience. You're still kind of sharing a train with those people, and the fact that you're not interacting with each other is in its own way kind of a mark of respect. You see what I mean? Rather than you're not insulting each other. You see what I mean? It's like people don't talk to each other on the train, but they don't insult each other on the train. They don't, but they don't compliment each other either. So it's kind of a neutral position that you're taking.
I agree, and I mean Lester comes up with that as well. He comes to that sort of thing of when Eliza's system about like in company, he's like, yeah, I do. I genuinely enjoy talking to people. I just usually enjoy being alone more. It's like it's not.
It's a preference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And one thing, I mean, you say the opinion is controversial, but I have a very similar opinion with a little while back. I say a little while back, it's probably several years ago now. There was a thing that came out which was someone, I think it was in Tesco or something, was on their phone when they got all their shopping scanned through, and the woman who was serving him basically refused to serve him essentially because he's talking on the phone and being rude. And myself and my friend got into a debate about this. He previously worked in a restaurant of some sort, and I've worked in HMB and things like that before. And one thing I said was like, I think that's absolutely ridiculous that she would refuse him, because when I go to a shop, if someone talks to me when I'm, getting my stuff scanned or whatever, I mean, generally go for self-service so I don't have to deal with people. But when I, if it's a bit busy or there isn't a self-service, someone strikes up a conversation with me, I'm always fine to talk. I haven't got an issue with talking. But it's quite rare to be able to have a genuinely interesting, fruitful conversation with an individual in the space of about, a minute and a half of someone you've never met before, who is essentially working almost in a sense for you in that moment. And it's a really weird dynamic. And it's like, a lot of the time I would rather just have my headphones on, continue listening to the podcast or the music I'm listening to or whatever, and not have to, sounds really douchey, but not have to waste energy or effort having to try and make a conversation work with someone when it's easier to just kind of get along with my day, if you know what I mean. I think you kind of, the way you've described it, or at least a lot of your characters kind of feel similarly in that way in a lot of senses.
Yeah, and that probably, so did they refused to serve the person
who's on the phone?
Because yeah,
he's on the phone because he wasn't talking to her, being rude or something. And I'm just like, you don't pay to go. You don't pay.
I'd imagine that goes against like Tesco's policy.
Yeah,
because Tesco want the money.
Oh yeah, exactly.
For one thing, Tesco want the money, and secondly, from a customer service point of view, is you still have to serve the customer even if they're a complete dick. And it's just that's your job. And I've worked in customer service and I've served complete dicks. That was my job.
Yeah, it's like you know. I said to my friend, I was like, well, one thing that it kind of shut the argument down a little bit was I was like, okay, when I go to Tesco, okay, I'm not in there for conversation. I'm not in there so I can have a nice little chat with Doris, who's been working at Tesco for 50 years. Like, in all brutal honesty, I don't care about anyone in there any more than I do anyone else in the world. Just general mutual respect for humans. If anything really bad happened, I try and help them stuff. But in general, I don't actually care. I'm in Tesco to buy stuff because I need it to live, generally, because I need to buy food to eat it. That's most of the reason I'm in Tesco. So I don't want this conversation. Like if I was on the phone to someone, like, you don't know why they're on the phone. They could be talking to their dying mother in the hospital. They could be talking to their childminder about needing to sort out something for their kid. They could be talking to the school. It's like, you don't know what this person's doing in their life while they're on the phone, and you aren't important enough to argue that you should be spoken to while you're scanning things through. You're not trying to have this relationship with someone. I've gone to Tesco and Sainsbury's and all these other places, obviously, like, so many times in my life, especially when I moved away from home and I was always doing it. I don't think I can remember the face of a single person who has ever served me. And that's not to downplay their lives or importance in society in general, but it's that part of my life is not important to me, of meeting someone who's interesting at Tesco. Yes,
yeah. Well, it's presumably it's not important to them either. It's just you're working behind the counter at Tesco. You kind of serve, maybe 100 people a day or something like that, and you're not going to remember all of those people, I presume.
No. Well, also be working at HMV. I had certain conversations. Unless
you're that particular person. And you've got everyone's number. Everyone who looked at you in a slightly odd way. Keep looking at me funny. Stop it. I think they've just put an inappropriate person behind the till there.
Definitely.
That desperately wants to be liked by everyone.
Yeah, well, there are people who are like that in the world. I mean, when I was working at HMV, I served a lot of people, and I try and be smiley and friendly and stuff. And sometimes you'd have a little bit of rapport with someone, like something would click, and you just think, I could probably have a good conversation with you. But the thing is, I am at work, and if I chat with you for ages, I'm not going to get all these other customers served, which is the reason that I am here. You are here to buy things. I am here to take your things, make sure you pay for them properly, and then give them back to you. That's my job here. That's why I'm standing behind the counter. I'm not standing here and getting paid by HMV because they want everyone to have nice conversations. That will not fuel HMV in the longevity. Exactly. So I think, like, isolation, the idea that you're saying, isolation is not necessarily the same as solitude, and being alone isn't something that's always negative. And I think that's a very important message, actually, of people learning to be okay with being alone. Lester's relationship with Eliza is especially I found it very brilliant because it wasn't the standard sort of, these two people meet, they have a rapport, they fall in love, they get together, they have kids and get married and they live happily ever after. It's not, that's so simple, and it takes away from the meaning of their relationship. Like, he's a hermit and she's a person who's kind of almost trying to find herself. She's trying to figure out what she's kind of doing with herself for a lot of the book. And they have just they have niceties, they like each other's company, that they like being around each other. And maybe there is a bit more chemistry there, maybe there isn't, but it's that beauty of not every person who you come into contact with that you could have life with, you don't always have that. There's many people I've had in my life, many individuals, male or female. I've met women in my life who I could potentially see myself, if circumstances were different, being in a relationship with them. But because of me being in a relationship, or them, or us just being different times in our lives, or, I've met people before who are amazing and then they live, I meet them somewhere and they're like, oh, I actually live 5 hours away. I've come down here for a one-off. And there's 1,000 of different reasons why people can't be in your life. But with this book, what I think is I only just really thought of it highlights that of, don't downplay, and it was what you were saying earlier, the importance of individual impact in life. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to spend a huge amount of time with that person as an individual. If you know what I'm saying, I'm kind of rambling on a bit, but do you know what I'm saying?
What you're saying is true. I think of and also in terms of these particular characters in the book, Lester and Eliza, they've got this thing where they don't really know anything about each other in terms of their histories. Like he doesn't even know where she lives, for example, because she says, well, that's not important. I just sort of that they just kind of like hanging around together. And that's what makes their friendship. Whereas some people would look at that and say, well, it's not a proper friendship, is it? Because you don't really know each other's histories, and you don't know all these different details about each other. Whereas, to them, it's not important.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of, what's nice about the book is, I think, almost one of the potentially inadvertent messages is, it is what it is. Essentially, that kind of thing of, like, a lot of the characters in the book, some of them are a certain way. And the book isn't about, someone being a bad person, them having a redemption story, or this city being, dirty, and then someone coming along and fixing it all up, because that isn't what life's about. Life is, as an individual, there's a lot of things that you can't directly have a huge amount of control of. But as you said in this chat as well, but you don't know the impact you have on someone. It's a really weird dynamic being a person, because of simultaneously having to under and overvalue your own actual impact in life, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Hit the nail on the head. We spoke earlier slightly about the audiobook, and I'm just interested because obviously I've done many podcasts, but it's just me kind of rambling at people, and then much more interesting people than me having good conversations with me. And so I've never done an audiobook, so I'd be very interested to know sort of into the process, how long it generally took, and if you had any issues that came along with it.
Well, it's an absolute bloody nightmare, Mike. It is. No, I mean the end. I'm pleased with the end result, but my thinking behind it was, well, I do a podcast anyway. I bring a podcast out every week or every fortnight. This will be an absolute piece of cake. I'll get it done within the week, and then I can just carry on with my life. But it's an absolute nightmare. There are worse things to endure in your liime, no doubt. But I mean, I will say it's one of the hardest things I've ever done.
Really?
It just trying to put together, audiobooks when they're like when you're not like releasing it yourself and doing all the production and the legwork yourself. Is you got a team of people working on it, and you got a person who you bring in to do the reading of the book, and then it's all done in the studio and stuff. Whereas kind of with me, I'm using my home equipment, which kind of malfunctioned at various times, and I had to re-record bits of it, and I just had to work a lot on getting the tone of it right as well. So it was a good kind of learning experience, because it's something that I'd never done before. And the difference between doing the podcast that I do and doing the audiobook is that the worlds apart, really, because in my podcast I play music, and sometimes I interview people, and I kind of do bits of comedy and stuff like that, and it's all kind of me bouncing off other things. Whereas with the audiobook, it's just kind of me and a microphone and a book that I'm reading from, and it's just my voice. For 8 hours. And let me tell you now, it doesn't take 8 hours to do. It takes much longer than that. But it's I think the next one, which I will do, will be easier. And in terms of the actual, I think it's had a positive. The actual producing this audiobook has had quite a positive impact on my skills as an audio editor and stuff, so which has made my podcast a little bit better, in terms of the way that I produce it. So that's quite good.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a friend of mine who's I'm helping him sort of launch a podcast, and he's an author, and the general basis of ideas is he's going to be reading a chapter of a book of his books each time, and then at the start or maybe at the end or something, he's going to give some tips and tricks about sort of tips of the trade, writing, and like how he did it, as well as influences and things he had, almost like an extended version of the book, and he's going to release it as a podcast. I'm helping him sort out a lot of jazz with that. And one of the things that I thought of was like reading not only your own work, which obviously because of you made the book, you obviously had the idea, then you wrote it, then you edited it, then you probably read it about another 1,000 times until you were sick of reading it. And then you finally are done. And then you have to read it out loud another 1 or 2 or 3 times, and then also then listen back to yourself reading the book that you've spent however long writing and perfecting, and then reading it again, and then having to hear yourself say it again to make sure it's good enough for other people to hear. It sounds very draining.
Yes, I have spent a lot of time with this book over the years, yes, but it's I think it's made me appreciate the quality of it. I think I'm pleased with. I didn't actually have to. It's a good way of proofreading, as it turns out, as well. Because at various different times while I was reading this book, I was like, "Oh yeah, there's a typo there, isn't there?" When you read it out loud to yourself, kind of, "Oh yeah, I didn't mean that spelling of that particular word," and so I'd go into there and change it, even though I'd already kind of, I thought, stringently proofread it already, but actually sitting down and reading it out loud, you think, oh, okay, yeah, I didn't actually mean to say that. So there is that aspect of it, which kind of went into making sure that there are no typos in the finished product, which when you're releasing it yourself is quite important, because you haven't got a team of people, or you haven't got an editor apart from yourself and stuff like that. And so.
Well, yeah, regarding that as well, I'd like to ask, I think you've kind of half answered the question, but just to be clear, obviously you've been doing it all yourself, so did you write out all the book, and while writing it, you were intending on doing an audio version of it, or did you kind of finish the book, and then while you were getting ready for release, you were like, I should maybe do an audio version, and then you started doing the audio version, then you went back and edited the written version, or how? Because I've never obviously released a book or anything, so I'm just kind of intrigued of how it kind of went, in a sense.
Yeah, well, so I had the book finished, it was ready to go, and I was like, well, I had better do an audiobook version of this, because that would be my primary means of promoting it is through my podcast. And people who listen to podcasts like audio stuff, do they not? So I was thinking it'd be easier to, have an audio book version of it that I can kind of drop little bits of it into the podcast and things like that. And so definitely an audiobook is a good idea. So I recorded the audiobook, and here and there I spotted little errors that I went and corrected in the original text before it was published.
Nice.
So yes,
that's brilliant.
And I think most people who kind of do this sort of thing in terms of like releasing their own books and stuff don't usually bother doing an audiobook version of it, and I can understand why, because it's a ball ache to do, as it turns out. what was I saying?
So, the audiobook.
I had a point to make somewhere. Yes.
Well, it's gone into the abyss.
Yeah.
Okay, well, more in line with sort of the 100 as a book as well. I was thinking to go backwards and forwards because people need to go check out the book. It's absolutely fantastic. And I want to bring up just a couple of concepts you had in there, and I'd just be interested of your sort of general thoughts on it. Now, obviously, we've spoken a bit about all photos from your life and things like that. But another thing that came up, which I touched upon briefly earlier, was the sort of the mind reading thing. But it was what intrigued me the most about that was I think there's a sequence where Slumber Fairy is going around reading people's dreams and things, and one thing I hadn't even thought about with mind reading, because obviously, especially when you're a kid, you're always like, oh, what superpowers would you like? And some people want mind control or mind reading, some people want flying and whatever. But with reading people's minds, I've always kind of wanted to do that, but equally, people have very dark thoughts a lot of the time, and one can't always control what dark thoughts one has, but they can control how one acts about it or how one communicates with other people. But one thing I thought about is just dreams, and it's a very interesting concept. I'm not saying it's not ever been done before, but I'm not sure I've actually ever seen a show where someone can read minds and they've even explained about reading people's dreams and things. I mean, have you considered that sort of thing before, about sort of reading people's dreams? I know there's like machines that scientists are creating, I think, to try and do that, but has that come about at all?
I don't know whether it's possible to do it. Is that what you're asking?
How did you think of the sort of concept of reading people's dreams, and is that something that
again, it was just the idea of I came up with the concept of okay, let's come up with this idea of people can read each other's minds, and everyone can read everybody else's mind in society. How should we play around with this idea? So I kind of I thought, yeah, let's have this story, let's have that story. And then I thought, oh, presumably you can read people's dreams as well. So let's have a story about reading people's dreams. And, from there came the concept of somebody who is so interested in reading people's dreams that she literally breaks into people's houses while they're sleeping, reads the dreams and then leaves. And then goes to somebody else's house and does the same thing.
Yeah, and I liked the dog part as well, whereas I think she read like a pit bull. I don't know if it was a pit bull, I'm just imagining it being a pit bull, but she read like a dog's mind and read what the dog was dreaming about, and I just thought that was quite funny and clever as well, because that's just lots of little concepts that I hadn't thought of that I think are really good in this book. And one thing I do want to ask you about as well is sort of in the book, with the buildings being alive and obviously just people generally, you touch upon a lot of other things of not only the interconnectivity of life, but also communication between things that aren't necessarily, in our view, alive. What is it's a very big open question, and there's no preparation for it, so I'm sorry for throwing this at you. But what do you think consciousness sort of is? In a sense, it's sort of a really broad term of just what do you think kind of always defines consciousness? I'm sorry if that's such a big question.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because you only really know what's going on in your head, and my only experience of being conscious is my own experience of being conscious, and maybe everybody else in the world is experiencing a different thing to me. And maybe everybody else in the world doesn't exist, and it's all just my imagination.
I thought that.
So, but then just to, yeah, I mean, there's probably like a dictionary definition of the word conscious that you could bring in, and like a scientific definition of it. But I think, my understanding of it is it's just that anything that is alive and is aware of itself is therefore a conscious being. So it's difficult to know. It's difficult to quantify that. Are amoebas conscious beings? How would we know that they're not?
Very interesting.
They might be. I mean, but then maybe the table that I'm sitting in front of. Maybe the table is conscious as well, but also, but I mean, this is these little thought processes that I'm going through now are things that I brought into the book, as you know. So, sort of every thing that is a thing has its own consciousness in the dirty city. So the table actually does have its own conscious mind. And, you know, the glass that's on the table has its own separate, because it's a separate object, it's got its own separate consciousness. Now, I don't believe that is true in reality. But it makes a nice little story, doesn't it? It makes a nice little way of exploring the idea of consciousness. By making everything conscious, you can kind of explore the idea of, well, what is consciousness, and why am I different? Why am I different to that table? Because me and that table are both made of atoms, and if you study those atoms under a microscope, they look the same. So who's to say that table isn't alive?
Yeah, exactly. It's a very interesting concept. Obviously, more complicated than that, but it is. You know, who knows? In a sense, I'm in the same camp as you, which I think it's probably quite unlikely, but it does definitely make for a good story, and it certainly could be. And you know, with consciousness as a whole and sort of life in general, like, do you think there is like a meaning of life? Like, I don't know if we've ever discussed religion, and obviously, if you don't want to discuss that, it's a personal thing. That's more than fine. But do you believe there's a sort of a meaning to all of this sort of life?
No, I'm pretty firm that there isn't a meaning. I've sort of it's just chaos, really, and we're fortunate to be in the position that we're in that we probably shouldn't be here at all. It's just purely by luck on our part that we're here in the first place. Because I don't think that there's, you know, I'm kind of, you know, an atheist, I suppose you could say. So I don't believe that there's a plan behind it. I don't believe that there's a thing that created everything. I think it's just chaos. And like we were talking about earlier, people look for meaning within that in order to make themselves feel better about it.
Yeah.
But I prefer the idea that there is no meaning. I find that more comforting than the idea that somebody created me and they want me to behave in a certain way, and if I don't behave in a certain way, then I'm going to be punished for it. You know, I much prefer the idea that there is no meaning behind it, and I can do whatever I like.
Yeah, I mean, I agree,
and I choose to be nice to people because that's a good thing to do.
Yeah,
and,
I agree. And it's that there's that moral question, which I discussed with someone else on the podcast a few episodes ago, and it was, yeah, I mean, not to downplay anyone who's religious or anything like that necessarily, but it is that idea of, well, if a religious individual believes they do good things and they're going to get rewarded when they die, but an atheist doesn't believe they're going to get rewarded when they die, but is nice anyway, in theory, is that not a more positive moral choice? Because we're actually doing it just to be nice rather than some sort of idea of reward in the afterlife. So this is an interesting one. It's certainly, and I like the idea of there not being a specific meaning in life, as you say, because it means that people can kind of just make their own meanings up, you know?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I think it's just more. It's better for me that way. But I mean, I don't object to other people. If other people have got religious beliefs, then that's cool. And I think people can believe whatever they want to believe. And I kind of get frustrated by professional atheists like Richard Dawkins and people like that who just won't have it, won't have anything other than their point of view. It's just, you know, there's provable positive benefits to being religious and living within a community of people who support you. And it's, you know, arguably you can, you know, there's probably, you know, statistics and stuff to back this up, that with the rise of secularism in society, there's also a rise in depression and mental health issues and suicide. And that could be measured against, you know, people who live within religious communities and have community support that other people don't have. But I think that you can live in a community without being religious, and I think that's the way to go. I think the solution to the mental health crisis is not to say let's all be religious again. I think let's let the solution be let's be a community.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
It doesn't have to be a religious community. It can just be a community.
100%. Yeah, I think that is, I mean, one thing I've said a lot and agreeing with you completely is just that what we're lacking in life a lot of the time isn't necessarily religiosity and having these moral guidelines, because generally speaking, we all kind of know not to murder people or know that murdering is bad or whatever. We don't need the specific doctrine to say these things are good or bad, but what we do need is humans as social animals, and we always have been for as long as we've kind of been around in this form. So we do need that sense of community with each other. We need support networks that can help each other, that aren't dictated by arbitrary rules written in a book, hundreds or thousands of years old. More so just, I've kind of said it like this: just don't be a dick and be nice to people. And if everyone kind of did that, the world would pretty much be fine, wouldn't it? In a really, really simple way.
Yes.
That's kind of the answer that like a 14-year-old gives, but I'm sticking to that, and that's my life mantra. Also, with the idea of consciousness is an idea you came up with in the book, which is quite interesting, which is the building, the flat block is Jennifer, the sort of central building, the one that everyone lives in, the 100-story building. She, I think it is technically she, kind of believes that her intelligence, her kind of consciousness comes from all the people living within her. And then there's other parts in the book where there's sort of almost bigger and bigger parts of places which have got more and more people living in, and their group consciousness kind of makes other things. And it's quite an interesting concept because, we as humans like to think of ourselves as, everything I think is me, and that's my own consciousness and that sort of jazz. But when in reality, I think there's more cells in the human body that are not human specific cells than there are that are actually human specific cells. So the majority of your body is actually not yourself, which is a really weird concept. And like your stomach is filled with billions of bacterium and things like that. And it's like all these little bits and pieces kind of fit together, and that's what makes a human. So all humans kind of fit together, and that's kind of what makes an Earth, essentially, and you can kind of zoom out almost infinitely, and you just go out and out and out, and it's just everything is made out of little things, like you see about the table, made out of atoms and stuff. And it's kind of like everything is made out of more things, and you really you deal with that in multiple of the stories and things, and it's a very intriguing concept to sort of delve into. So I think it's definitely commendable of that sort of that thought process of multi-organisms becoming one organism in a sense, if you know what I mean.
Yes, yeah, and I kind of downplay it for most of the time. I had this little trick up my sleeve, I think, where I was I'll just introduce the concept that everything is alive and everything has its own personality, and then I won't do anything more with it. I'll just have that in the background. That's kind of lurking in the background. So every now and again, like an empty packet of crisps or something will start talking to a lamppost or something like that, and then I'll just move on from it, and I won't make a big deal of it. But then kind of there's kind of like a I know I'm giving all the spoilers away here, but there's kind of a climactic scene at the end where kind of the city starts talking, and then the city starts having a conversation with the planet, and the planet starts having starts talking to the sun and stuff, and then again I just drop it. And then I move on.
Yeah. That is the beauty of the book. I think it is brilliant. And there are some really funny moments in the book as well, which I really commend. And one quote that I've actually wrote down on my phone, because obviously I listen on commutes and things, and driving to and from work, and obviously I'm never on my phone while driving, so as soon as I stopped moving I wrote this down just to be clear for everyone. But there's one bit which is the politician, the main one we've discussed a couple of times, Jeremy Mercer, who's done this, that and the other and caused a lot of the issues in the dirty city. There's one bit where he has is talking about a rally that he did, and he says lots of sort of rubbish and loads of people really like it and things. But I just want to read just one line from the book, and I just think it's just it made me laugh out loud when I heard it, and it's going to be not as it's not going to have the same impact for people because they're not listening to the book. But I just think it's so clever, which is just audience members were rushed to the hospital with broken fingers for clapping too hard, and I just think that image is so good. Just that one thing that just, as soon as it happened, I was like, I went from this is a really cool book to this is an amazing book. I love that line.
Oh, excellent.
There's so many lines in that book.
I'll tell you what's interesting about that is that the Jeremy Mercer character, a few people have read the book and they've said to me, I like him. He's a bit like Trump, isn't he? And I said, well, yeah, maybe, but I wrote this in 2012, and in 2012, Donald Trump was the presenter of The Apprentice, and nobody knew that he was even considering a career in politics at that point. And there's been a few things that have happened in politics in the last since I wrote the book, sort of in the last 5 years. With Brexit and kind of populism and stuff like that. And the Jeremy Mercer character, there's kind of a populist element to like the speeches that he gives and stuff like that, and the way that people react to them, even though he's basically screwing everybody over. But a lot of people love him for no apparent reason. And so I'm not pleased with the way that politics has turned out in the last 5 years, but I'm quite pleased with the fact that I kind of foreshadowed it by creating that character. But I mean, also he is kind of, in many respects, he's kind of the opposite of Donald Trump as well, because he's like, Jeremy Mercer, the character, is kind of supposed to be like a parody of like a career politician who's like the cat with 9 lives who you just can't kill. So he just keeps cocking things up. Whatever department he's put in, he cocks it up. Moves on to a different department, cocks that up. Moves to a different department. He basically screws over the entire city over the course of his career, but he just can't be sacked because it's just a revolving door, and kind of that's it. In many respects, he is the thing that Trumpism was a reaction to, and a lot of people voted for Trump because he wasn't a politician and because they were tired of having all these people screwing them over all the time. And, as it turns out, Trump is a lot worse than that. but that's the irony, isn't it, I suppose?
It definitely is. And I'm going to start, it's getting quite late now, so I'm going to start to wrap things up a little bit. But I did want to, there is one other thing I wanted to touch upon. I want to know your opinion, which is a theme that came up in the book. And I remember writing it down, but I can't remember exactly what from. It might have been part of the Defo Trezor sort of ideas and things, but it was just conspiracy theories. Or was it? I think it was about the sort of story arc about the prison and things, those sorts of things. Of just do you believe in conspiracy theories? Basically, is what I'm trying to blurt out and ramble on. It's just, do you generally believe in them and things? If so,
not generally, no. Unless there's like a sound basis behind it. I think that there are a lot of unanswered questions in the world, and people kind of fill in the gaps with a lot of kind of conjecture and a lot of unproven stuff. And the fact that there are a lot of unanswered questions about 9/11, like, for example, it doesn't mean that I believe that 9/11 was an inside job or that anything like that, but it just there's a lot of fuel there for conspiracy theorists to come up with ideas about what actually happened that day, because I don't think the public have been told exactly what did go on. And maybe there's good reasons for that in terms of like security concerns and stuff like that. But I am very interested in conspiracy theories, though. I like the idea that people believe that the moon landings didn't happen, And I like the idea that people believe that the Earth is flat, and all sorts of things like that. But I mean, there are certain there's if you look into like the Bilderberg Group and stuff like that, things that have a sound sort of basis behind them. Because the Bilderberg, do you know about the Bilderberg Group?
As in Build-A-Bear, the company, the factory sort of thing. That we...
No, a Bilderberg. It's the name of the hotel that this group of kind of elite sort of politicians and businessmen, and that they all meet at the Bilderberg Hotel on an annual basis, I think it is. And there's a certain there's a lot of conjecture that they are like the secret rulers of the world.
The Illuminati sort of thing.
Yeah, but it's not the Illuminati. It's a specific thing, and it's a real thing. It does exist. It's been proven. They have these meetings once a year. They call themselves the Bilderberg Group. They're quite open about it, and it's there's a very good book that John Ronson wrote about it called Them. Them is the name of the John Ronson book, and it touches upon the Bilderberg Group quite a lot. And so that's my favorite conspiracy theory, because it's got a sound basis within the real world. But I don't necessarily believe that these people are the secret rulers of the world. But I think that they are a group of people who have a lot of influence within politics and within business, who kind of control a lot more stuff than they are given credit for, given that most people don't know what the Bilderberg Group is. Yeah,
myself included. But yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. Like, I completely agree with a lot of things that you've said there, especially there's a lot of gaps in information people have, especially, with things like 9/11. I mean, one of the big conspiracy theories that, once again, I wouldn't say I necessarily follow any necessarily, but there is like the day that Kennedy got shot. That with that, the more you look into that, like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there's a lot of things that do not add up, like, at all. And I'm no expert in it, but there's Joe Rogan's spoken about it quite a lot, so I know he said a few things about it. But I remember looking up the magic bullet theory, and there's all these sorts of things where Lee Harvey Oswald did have ties to Russia and things, but then there's a lot of weird gaps in his own timeline of when he got from point A to point B, and then did the CIA or whoever get to him. And then also, Kennedy was doing a lot. He said this big speech before he got shot about, there's a lot of don't trust your government, and there's a lot of things that are going on behind closed doors people don't know about. And that this was before obviously the internet or anything, and it was like all this really. I listened to the speech a while back, and I was like, he's saying some really like conspiracy theorist sort of stuff, and then he gets shot, and then there's all this weird sort of stuff surrounding it. And there are a lot of things that you can look into. I mean, about the moon landing, one of the things is like people say about the flag waving is wrong or something, and these sorts of things. And there are some inconsistencies which some attribute to them being, either it's just something that hasn't been figured out quite right, we don't really know why, or it is footage got missed. There's a theory that like a lot of the moon landing footage got destroyed or something, so they basically recreated it essentially, and that's a theory as well. Right, and there's things like that, and it's like I don't know, none of us know. We can but they're fun to entertain those ideas. I will say the moon landing thing though, which I think I heard someone say at some point, was that the technology available at whenever the moon landing was, I think it's the 60s, but I might be completely off with my timeline. When the moon landing happened, the technology that we had on Earth was enough to get someone to the moon, but it wasn't actually good enough for video editing to be able to actually fake the moon landing properly, because the technology just hadn't caught up, which is interesting. I haven't looked into it enough. I just, as yourself, I really like thought experiments. I really like these ideas, and it's probably one of the reasons why your book, not only is it's really well done, but I just think a lot of it really appealed to me. The sort of these thought experiments, like the whole, I'm sure you've heard of simulation theory, where that we're all in a simulation. Have you heard that?
Okay, right. Like the Matrix type thing?
Pretty much. The idea that gives it a lot more grounding is essentially the way we're going with technology now. If we use the argument that we're not in a simulation, like I don't think we are necessarily in a simulation, but if we were, I wouldn't really be surprised, because it's just a thing of our technology is getting so good, and virtual reality goggles, we've only had the internet for like 30 years. We've had video games, if you go back to like Pong, for like, less than 100 years. So you think like how far we've come in that amount of time, and how quickly things are getting amazing. And then you've got virtual reality where you can go into a world that looks quite cool, but not real. When we get to a point eventually where it looks as good as reality does, it's going to go so far beyond that. Like we've only had like electricity for like 150 plus years, whereas humans have been around for however many 100,000 years, and then how many more we got to go. We're going to get virtual reality that's going to be so good, it's going to be indistinguishable from real life. And then so how would we know we haven't already got to that point? That's kind of like the main argument of it, of where it's going to happen. Most likely that it's going to be so good we can't differentiate. So how do we know we're not already actually there? Like, what's the statistical likelihood that the life we're living right now is the one timeline before all that happens, as opposed to being one of the countless millions of possibilities of being in one of those simulations? And once again, I don't believe that.
Why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't life be better than it is if it was just a game that we were playing, though?
Well, maybe it's part of the struggle. Maybe that's part of the fun, isn't it? Like, I'm not. Have you seen the show Rick and Morty?
Yes, I have. Yes.
There's a. They go in the arcade in one or two of the episodes. I think 2 separate times, and there's a game called. It's called like some really bland name. It's like Simon or something. And you put on this helmet on, and then you just live life as a human, just like a really average, normal life. And you can just you can do what you want. You can essentially become the head of the CIA, or you can just be a farmer, or you can do whatever. You've just like this basic life, and it's just the idea of if we were maybe in the future and everything was really, say, fucked up or something, and everything was really messy and whatever. Maybe it's nice to come to a simpler life where there aren't really absolutely horrendous things happening, but it's just kind of a bit of struggle, but a bit of payoff. I don't know. It's a fun thing to talk about, but I don't really think it is. But there's a lot of craziness in this world that we can't really explain, and maybe that would fill in the gap, maybe not. But the thing I think people have to be wary of when they do think of these, if we're in a simulation, or if 9/11 was an inside job, or if there is, some organisation that is controlling the whole world, it's one of the things where maybe be wary of these things. And if you believe in these things, then fair enough. But one thing that people have to try and not do is let it run your life. If 9/11 is an inside job,
or don't let don't be certain about things that you can't be certain about. And because I do believe that you brought up the Kennedy assassination, and that's one good example of something that clearly the official version of what happened isn't what really happened. But I don't think anyone's ever going to know what the truth is behind it. And it's the same with 9/11 as well. I think it's one of those things where we were told a certain thing. But what really happened, we won't really get the full story. And it's all very well saying, I think this happened, but you can't really be certain about it because you don't know.
Exactly. And religion is the same. That's believe whatever you want about religion, but no one has the answer. Everyone just has answers, and some of them are. It's like going back to the book. Actually, it loops back very nicely. There's a couple of stories that are said in the book by like a character in the Dirty City, and they're telling another character a story, and then it finishes, and then the character goes, "Is that actually real? Did that happen?" And then sometimes the character goes, "No," and other times go, "I don't know, maybe." And it's like, it's fun just to have the story. It doesn't matter if it's real or not, And that's kind of the beauty of the book. Well, I think that's quite probably a good way to end it. Otherwise, I'm just going to end up ranting, rambling about God knows what. But I'd say it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and I'll include links and everything, and I'll make sure I sort of talk about the book more and things in the coming podcasts and whatever. But just tell people where people can find you, find the book, and all that sort of other jazz. And anything else you want to add before we kind of finish up, and go from there. My web address is frankburton.co.uk, which has got all the information about my books that are available on there, including the audiobook version of 100, and my podcast, which we talked about a little bit, is Ragbag, which comes out every 2 weeks or every 1 week if I'm feeling particularly productive. And that's very good. And
What else? I'm on Twitter. My handle is ragbagfrank. And Ragbag's got a Facebook page, which is on Facebook as Ragbag Podcast. And one day I will succumb to joining Instagram, but not today.
Who knows what the time this has been released. But yeah, I mean, that's wonderful. And yeah, I'll be sure to include all the links and all that sort of jazz. And yeah, well, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you once again, Frank. And I'm sure we'll chat again before that. But when you release your next book as well, have you on and we can talk about that some more. So
excellent.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you, Frank.
Thank you very much.
And that's the end of part 2. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. Next week, maybe part 1 of my chat with Beth Crane of We Fix Space Junk, or it may be another Science But Simple with the amazing Josh Murray, who I think has been on the show more than anyone due to this mini-series of Science But Simple, which if you haven't checked out, go through the back catalogue. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think episode 6 was like the first one, and I generally did it like every 6 or so for a little while, then there was a little gap, and then another couple gap. It kind of depends what my schedule's like. Josh is also a teacher, and he's in his year of sort of training and things like that, so he's very, very busy, so it's not always easy for us to sit down and organise a podcast. But there should be one next week because it's end of term for Easter, teachers' timetables and things, so hopefully I'll have another Science But Simple, which I can release next week as a sort of gap between two big two-parters. I should also be recording a podcast, where has that gone, with a friend of mine on Tuesday 23rd. I don't know how long that'll be. I think it's going to be vaguely about music and movies because he's a massive movie and music buff. Music, not music. And then after that, I should be chatting with 2 more people. So we shall see, my friends. If anyone would prefer to listen to the Beth one first or the Science But Simple first, hit me up and I'll kind of count who wants what. But I'll probably do Science But Simple first, if I'm being completely honest with you, because I am my own person and I make all the decisions. And this is an especially rambly end to the podcast. So apologies for that. I've come back from Amsterdam and my brain's a bit frazzled. I mean, I've been back for 2 days, but I don't think that weed actually sort of carries on for several days, but, we did eat a couple of brownies and partake in the green smoke, so maybe that's had an impact, maybe not. I am usually a rambly mess Sunday night, so I don't think I can blame drugs for that. But don't worry, guys, if anyone who's anti-cannabis or anything like that, because I was in among certain lines in the sand where it's legal to do those things, and it is socially acceptable in a country where it's not legal to do those things, to go somewhere else and do those things. Anyone who can make sense of that, I don't really, who knows? But that's the kind of world we live in. But I'm not going to get into a debate about the legalization of cannabis or my opinions on that, because I have spoken about it a fair amount on this podcast, including a few weeks ago, I think, when I spoke to my friend Stephen Beswick. I think the title was something about music festivals or something along those lines. We speak about the legality of drugs and things, and in several other podcasts, one with Carla, back one of the early ones I did as well, and it is quite a recurring theme. So anyway, thanks as always for listening, guys. Do the usual, like on the social media channels, share on the usual places, tell people about the podcast. There's loads of things in the back catalogue that you may enjoy and other people may enjoy. I don't advertise the podcast and spend any money on it. I just invest a lot of time. So anyone who can do some extra sharing, it is much appreciated. I love each and every one of you for listening, especially this far, to not only my interesting guests, but also to me just verbally waterboarding anyone who's listening at the end. So thanks to all of you guys. I do really appreciate it. I'm going to go now and just remind you to go check out Frank's book in all the links in the description, because it is fantastic. So do that. Appreciate all the love, and I'll talk to you all next week.